If it's Tuesday, America is in mourning again after another school campus is now a crime scene as a mass shooting kills 3 students and injures 5 at Michigan State University. Plus, President Biden faces pressure to speak out as lawmakers call for the administration to disclose more information about those mysterious objects in U.S. airspace. And it's official. Former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley announces she's running for president, setting the stage for what could soon be a crowded and contentious fight for the future of the Republican Party. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker. We begin with breaking news out of East Lansing, Michigan, where we're learning more about the victims of last night's shooting at Michigan State University. While investigators piece together what led to the shooting and why the gunman targeted the campus, police have identified the 3 people killed: junior Ariel Anderson, junior Alexandria Verner, and sophomore Brian Frazier, whose family released this picture of him earlier this afternoon. 5 other students were also injured and remain in critical condition. Police say the shooting unfolded at 2 locations: Berkey Hall, an academic building, and the student union. Here's how students described what happened.
I heard people screaming they're shooting, yes, and that's when I began to run. Eventually, there was shooting in the courtyard, so like the courtyard of the building of Hubbard, which is like the courtyard connects to Acres, and then they started blockading the doors, and we just started rushing, blocking the doors. And then one of the doors, people just started screaming and running. I just saw this group of people, and all I hear is people screaming they're shooting. And thank God. I just see it. Keep in mind, there's like maybe 250 plus people in this entire dining hall. They've had us here the entire time, no one in, no one out. And I see everyone's crying. And just as we freshly blockaded the doors, apparently people heard shooting, they heard the door open, and it's this giant stampede of people headed toward me.
So difficult to hear from those students as they processed what happened in real time. Police say the shooter then took his own life. They've identified him as a 43-year-old man who wasn't affiliated with the university. All Michigan State classes have been canceled for the rest of the week. Governor Gretchen Whitmer has ordered all flags across the state to be lowered to half staff. And just moments ago, President Biden renewed his call for what he calls common sense gun law reforms. Take a listen.
It's happening far too often in this country. Far too often. While we gather more information, there's one thing we do know to be true. We have to do something to stop gun violence ripping apart our communities. We took a big step toward passing the most significant bipartisan gun legislation in 30 years. Ghost guns and other things, background checks, but there's a lot more work to do. And I'm committed to getting it done with all of you.
Just to put this into context, folks, this is the 8th shooting at a school in the United States in the last 12 months alone. That's according to NBC News' school shooting tracker. It's also the 2nd school shooting in Michigan in less than 15 months. This morning, Michigan Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin, whose district includes East Lansing, said she's tired of lawmakers doing nothing to address the issue.
I am filled with rage that we have to have another press conference to talk about our children being killed in their schools. And I would say that you either care about protecting kids or you don't. You either care about having an open and honest conversation about what is going on in our society or you don't. But please don't tell me you care about the safety of children. For me, the most haunting picture of last night was watching the cameras pan through the crowds and seeing a young person wearing an Oxford Strong sweatshirt. The sweatshirts that were handed out after those kids lived through a school shooting 15 months ago. And we have children in Michigan who are living through their 2nd school shooting in under a year and a half. If this is not a wake-up call to do something, I don't know what is.
NBC's Jesse Kirsch joins me now live from East Lansing. Jesse, everyone, I think all across the country is saying, here we go again. It is so painful and so difficult to keep having the same conversation over and over again. In this case, what do we know about this shooter?
Yeah, and Kristen, I think one of the things that underscores that idea of here we go again is some of the students we talked about spoke of this as something they've grown up with, that they are essentially prepared for as much as they're learning about science and math and reading. they're learning about how to react in this kind of situation. And so that just was underscored in the conversation I had with a group of students. What we know about this shooter right now is, first and foremost, according to the Attorney General of Michigan, he should not have been able to have a weapon. The alleged gunman should not have been able to have a handgun or a firearm of any kind in his possession because of a prior conviction. And so that, again, will be raising even more questions about how he may have gotten this weapon, and will obviously be folded into the debate around guns in this country, which often follows in the aftermath of these kinds of situations. That's just adding to the questions here, because we do not have a motive. We do not have any sense of a motive from officials, and they've made clear here, police from Michigan State, that this suspect did not have an affiliation with Michigan State University. So the question is, of course, why did he choose to go to this campus allegedly and carry out this killing spree?
And Jesse, talk a little bit about, I know that there have been interviews with his father. Apparently he lost his mother and he was struggling with that. What has his father been saying to reporters?
Yes, I want to read some of the reporting from our colleagues at NBCNews.com who spoke with the father of the alleged gunman from this incident and said that his son, quote, turned, quote, evil and mean, described him as becoming reclusive after his mother's death in the last couple of years. And obviously, we haven't heard much about this potentially being tied in with a motive from officials, but gives you some insight into what someone close to the suspect saw in his son and did not realize, according to our team's reporting, that his son was allegedly behind this killing spree until he saw law enforcement swarming around his home last night.
Just a horror all around. And in an extraordinary turn, NBC News has spoken with a Michigan State student who actually survived another shooting. Jesse, what can you tell us about this?
Yeah, so obviously, as we've talked about, Kristen, you were just pointing to moments ago, this is something that happens again and again. But of course, even amongst all these mass shootings that we have gone through over the years in this country, some of them stick out. One of them would be the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, several years ago now. And one young woman, a student here at Michigan State, says that she was a survivor of that shooting as well as this one. Here's part of what she told our Maggie Vespa.
This needs to be more than a news story tomorrow, and it needs to be more than, unfortunately, multiple people reach out to me. I mean, we have Oxford high school students at Michigan State. We have people who have experienced other mass shootings who are at Michigan State, and there is nothing that will ever be okay about that. And it's going to be a generation of change, and that's all that I can keep pushing and using whatever platform I have to keep pushing that.
And again, Kristen, I think underscoring right there, the word generational sticks out. This is something that is commonplace, it seems, for these young people, Kristen.
You're right. It is so painful to think of a generation of students who are growing up in these conditions. Jesse Kirsch, thank you so much. We are joined now by Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Dingell of Michigan. Congresswoman, my condolences to you and to your community. Thank you for being here on what is just a tragic day for our entire nation.
Thank you, Krista. And it is. It's the 67th shooting this year. When's enough enough?
Yeah, well, take us back to last night if you can. I know it's painful, but when you first learned about this shooting, yet another shooting on a school campus, what went through your head? What was in your heart?
Well, the first thing you worry about is, while I represent the University of Michigan, I have staff that lives in East Lansing. I have kids that have worked for me that went there. You're scared for everybody. You wonder if somebody you know, you wonder if they're safe. You just have the human reaction of, oh my God, here we go again. And then I was up all night talking to people. My district director lived a block from where the assailant shot and killed himself. He had to hide in place. And it's, again, and I am not, well, I do obviously have prayers and thoughts with the family. I'm not going to say it because today's the 5th anniversary of Parkland. When are we going to do something so this is not a way of life for our kids? And it's not, I thought 5 years ago, okay, the kids will get the change. Well, the kids are going to have to bring about the change because We keep talking and nothing happens.
I do want to follow up with you on that very point, Congresswoman, because in the wake of the Uvalde school shooting, there was some measured gun legislation. President Biden referenced it today in his remarks that was passed. And I guess the question is, did Congress miss an opportunity to do more? There's criticism that the background checks are not strong enough, that the suggestion that states enact red flag laws just don't have enough teeth. What more do you want to see happen?
Well, I actually would like to see red flag laws. You know, I've debated talking about this today, but I've listened to the father of this, the man that killed these kids again, and how did he have access to guns? Mm-hmm. We have a mental health crisis in this country, and we've made it difficult for people to get mental health. But I had a father who needed help. He shouldn't have had those guns. And you can't get help for people. You cannot keep guns out of the hands of those that should not have them. And, you know, I've talked more about it in recent years, but I had to go find out myself. My father was a convicted felon, but he still had those guns. How are we going to address the issue of sick people not having guns? Can't we agree on that?
Well, and I appreciate your bringing your personal perspective to this. And I guess that does raise the question, is there a law that would have prevented this shooter from getting this gun? Is this about not doing a good enough job enforcing the law that was on the books? Because he did have a record, and by that account should not have had access to any weapon.
We don't have the facts. We don't know how he got the gun, where he got it from. He should not have had the gun. That is an example of. But his father knew his son had a problem. The neighbors knew he was shooting into the backyard. We've got to have, that's a red flag law to me. If you people don't want to pass these red flag laws. Law enforcement, we need to protect due process. I get all of that, but you know what? Those kids need due process. People that are living near people that have guns that shouldn't need to have due process as well.
Congresswoman, what do you want to see from President Biden? He has, in a State of the Union address, we heard him again call for the assault weapons ban, something that there just aren't enough votes for. How should he be using his bully pulpit? And are you satisfied with what you've seen from him on this?
Well, first of all, I've known Joe Biden a long time, and I was there in the 90s. My husband was a very complicated man, voted for the gun bill, but resigned from the NRA board. I'm going to be blunt. This is an issue that's very personal and one I've studied a lot. We got to help him. President Biden can talk all he wants, but we in the Congress and we in state legislature have to find a way that our kids' voices are what matters. The president needs to keep pushing, but he's got to have people that are going to be there to also say we need to do something. And I'm begging the kids who are outraged, who are living with this, who shouldn't be living, make your voices heard. Maybe you are the ones that can finally get somebody to say, okay, do something. We don't want to live like this.
All right. Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, I'm going to leave it on that very powerful point. We really appreciate your joining us on this day after yet another shooting on a school campus. Thank you so much. And again, our condolences to your community.
Thank you.
We want to turn now to developments on the recent string of aerial objects shot down over U.S. and Canadian airspace. Today, administration officials held a second classified briefing for U.S. senators. The private session appears to have only heightened some of the bipartisan concerns in Congress about the administration's lack of transparency and willingness to share information publicly. Here were some of the comments from lawmakers as they were leaving that classified session.
President Biden owes the American people an explanation. President Biden should speak on camera directly to the American people today.
I have a better understanding, but the American people need and deserve to know more. I think that there's a need for greater transparency and more facts to the American people.
The administration needs to be more transparent. And by the way, that was a bipartisan view down there. And it's pretty simple. They can say what they know, what they don't know, and don't reveal sources and methods.
The White House saying today they have nothing to announce on whether the president will speak on these incidents in the coming days. While we haven't heard directly from President Biden following these latest incidents, we are learning more about these unidentified objects from members of the administration. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby told reporters today that based on an initial assessment and caveating that the debris has yet to be found, the intel community's leading explanation is that the three unidentified objects shot down over the weekend are tied to commercial or research entities, calling them, quote, benign. In Brussels, the nation's top military officer, General Mark Milley, revealed that the first U.S. missile aimed at the object over Lake Huron this weekend missed its target, falling harmlessly into the water, a development not previously disclosed by the White House or Pentagon. While the U.S. and Canada continue to search for the debris from these latest incidents, NORAD is saying today that the U.S. has been able to recover significant debris from the Chinese spy balloon that was shot down 10 days ago, including some of the devices, sensors, and electronics. Joining me now is NBC News Pentagon correspondent Courtney Kube in Brussels, where Secretary Austin and General Milley are holding meetings on the war in Ukraine. Courtney, you have been all over this story from the beginning. We cannot say this enough. You are the reporter who broke the story that there was, in fact, that balloon hovering over U.S. airspace that the U.S. said initially was a Chinese spy balloon. So let me ask you about the developments today. General Milley, John Kirby have both said the debris from these three objects has not yet been found. And you and I are trying to figure out, will it ever be found, Courtney? What are the implications if they can't find the debris?
So I think that's when we will not see a definitive decision about exactly what these objects were. So as you mentioned in the lead-in, the administration is leaning more and more towards the idea that these were not nefarious in nature, but they still aren't saying exactly what they were. And even more importantly, who may have owned them. We aren't aware of anyone claiming responsibility for any of these objects yet at this point. So without some sort of a positive identification, which would require them to pull these things up from the bottom of the lake or the ocean or wherever they are in these very difficult conditions, we will not have that positive identification that will give us a very certain idea of exactly what these things are.
And Courtney, what are some of the key takeaways from your reporting over the past 24 hours that has really stood out to you? Because one of the criticisms that we're hearing on Capitol Hill is that the administration is not being forthcoming enough. And you are obviously there talking to sources and top officials. Are you learning anything new that has stood out to you?
So what struck me over the past couple of days, candidly, Kristen, is the fact that they still don't have the debris from any of these three follow-on objects, and yet we're learning in little bits and pieces more and more about assessments or analysis from the administration, which to me indicates that they've known all along. They've known from the time they first spotted these objects what they could be, and that they may not have any kind of a nefarious intent. Now, everyone forgets that almost from the very beginning, when of the Chinese high altitude surveillance balloon, from the beginning, officials were very confident it was Chinese, and that was because they had been tracking it and they had some sort of intelligence that they won't really tell us about that made them confident that that's who owned it. But we don't have that on these follow-on threes. But even with that, we're still getting little bits and bits of pieces here. I also was struck by the fact, frankly, that it took specifically asking General Milley about that missile missing over Lake Huron for the Pentagon to acknowledge that. That's the kind of thing that's going to lead to more criticism of transparency here. When they put out the initial statement saying that it had been shot down, why not acknowledge that 2 missiles were fired, especially if it really just went into Lake Huron and no one was injured and there was no kind of damage from it? So that's hurting their credibility, frankly, when they don't acknowledge things like that right off the bat.
Court, let me follow up with you on that point, because the administration is facing criticism over its perceived lack of transparency and new questions about what happened this weekend. Was the U.S. too quick to shoot down those 3 objects? Was it a knee-jerk response for the criticism it got for not shooting down the Chinese spy balloon quickly enough? What are sources telling you?
So I think we have to actually look at these as two separate events. The Chinese spy balloon, which legitimately there were concerns about shooting it down when it was over the U.S. It had a debris field that was 7 to 10 miles wide when it was finally shot down. Think about this thing, 200 feet tall. It had a payload. I mean, that is the real potential to hurt someone or infrastructure or whatever on the ground if you shoot it down. So take that separately, that they decided not to shoot that down until it was over the ocean. The other three are very different. Those decisions were made very quickly, according to a number of officials who I've spoken with, almost immediately, that once they realized that they were at an altitude that could endanger civilian or military aircraft, there was a very quick decision to shoot those down. And so I think there are going to be questions. I think it's legitimate for members of Congress to ask questions about whether they overreacted here, given the fact that it was right after the spy balloon, that they took that into account and they overreacted here.
Courtney Kube, who has been out front on this story from day one. Courtney, thank you so much, and safe travels, my friend. Coming up, the mystery of what's in our skies and the potential threat it poses. I'll speak with the former director of operations, NORAD. That's next. Plus, a new generation of leadership. That's Nikki Haley's opening pitch to voters as she becomes the first Republican to officially challenge former President Donald Trump for the Republican nomination. What it means for her party and 2024 ahead. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Following today's classified briefing, some senators sounded reassured that the latest object shot down did not pose a threat to the country.
I am not in any way afraid that we are under a threat of attack or physical harm to our homeland.
I'm not any more concerned than I was before in terms of America's vulnerabilities.
It was clear there was these objects posed no threat to civilian or other population entities.
Despite the reassurance, the discovery of the aerial objects has raised fresh questions of how aware we are of what's flying in U.S. airspace, and it's prompted other countries to examine their own airspace as well. Japan says it now assesses Chinese surveillance balloons likely entered its airspace at least 3 times in recent years. Joining me now is retired Canadian Air Force Major General and former Director of Operations at NORAD, Scott Clancy. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
I want to start right there with what we heard from the senators who said that based on the briefing that they just received today, the 3 objects that were shot down over U.S. airspace over the weekend did not pose a threat. They are being described as benign commercial or research objects. What do you make of that assessment and how quickly the objects were shot down?
So, yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there. I think from the very beginning, whether it's Secretary Austin, whether it's the Canadian Minister of National Defense or General Vennert, the commander of NORAD, that these objects did not pose an immediate military threat to both Canada and the United States was clear. I think the same determination was made about the Chinese spy balloon on the front end of it as well, that these don't pose a specific threat. That doesn't mean that they're not intelligence gathering devices. And I haven't seen any specific reports that have said that these are commercial in nature either. So, that's kind of where I am with this. Now, the second thing that you asked there was about the speed or rapidity with which that these were brought down. I think, and I know because, when I was Director of Operations in NORAD, this was my job, that each one of these tracks is dealt with discreetly and specifically on its own merits. Now, they seem to have been coalescing together, that each and every one of them, the predominant factor that was at play here was that they were a threat to civil aviation, a hazard to civil aviation, and that became the rationale to bring them down. The only other thing that I would caution is that these 3 were not all brought down, under the authority of the American administration. 2 were. Alaska and Huron, but the other one was under the authorities of the Canadian National Sovereign Authorities.
That's a really important point. Just to follow up with you on that, because the administration has gotten some criticism that it brought down the 2 and then the one that was requested by authorities in Canada as quickly as it did because of the criticism that it got for not bringing down the Chinese spy balloon more quickly. What do you make of that criticism? How should we think about that piece of it?
That doesn't ring true to me because, I work inside of the enterprise in the past that did this. So, if we walk through perhaps how an engagement occurs. So the track, would come up on a radar screen somewhere. It would be cued by intelligence. Aircraft would be launched to go and identify exactly what that is. Those pilots would be out there looking and seeing and then using the systems on board their aircraft to figure out whether that's a civilian aircraft. Because all they would know before that is it's a track on a radar. They would see that it's a balloon. Okay, they would look at its characteristics and airspeed and configuration and take pictures. If it was an aircraft, they'd figure out compliance. But all of this would be transmitted back to NORAD headquarters. And then NORAD would be characterizing or describing this to the authorities in both Washington and Ottawa.
So just to put a fine point on this, were there unidentified objects that were identified during your time at NORAD? And were any of them brought down or shot down? Or brought down in any other way?
No. So this, as has been said, it's a monumentous occasion. This is the first time that kinetic action has been taken by NORAD against any tracks in Canada and the United States. However, have we launched aircraft on tracks? Absolutely. The idea here is that a radar, gives you a track. You may or may not have any intelligence that cues you to what that is, at which point in time you launch aircraft to clarify that.
Does NORAD have the resources it needs moving forward? And what are the key unanswered questions that you want the answers to?
So the first part to that is NORAD modernization, continental defense are priorities in both the Department of Defense in the States budgets, as well as the Department of National Defense and the key armed forces in the North. We have to proceed very quickly here. Because, and one of the reasons why I think the senators in their briefing today are no more concerned before as after is they have a good sense to just how much we've allowed the NORAD enterprise, to its technology to fester. The idea, however, is that the binational agreement and the effective command and control of it has served us very, very well. So I think that's the primary thing. Mm-hmm. Concerned then, we're not any more concerned than we were, a few weeks ago.
Okay. Retired Major General Scott Clancy, thank you so much for your great information today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
Coming up next, we're talking 2024 as Donald Trump just got his first challenger for the Republican nomination and also the desperate need for aid in Turkey and Syria. I'll talk to the head of the International Rescue Committee about the challenges aid workers are facing on the ground right now in getting help where it's needed most. You're watching Meet the Press Now.
Some people look at America and see vulnerability. The socialist left sees an opportunity to rewrite history. China and Russia are on the march. They all think we can be bullied, kicked around. You should know this about me. I don't put up with bullies. And when you kick back, it hurts them more if you're wearing heels.
Welcome back. With that, Nikki Haley is off and running. The former South Carolina governor and UN ambassador is now the second announced candidate in the 2024 Republican presidential field after, of course, former President Donald Trump. In that kickoff video, Haley also urged her party to expand its footprint and embrace generational change. Take a listen to that part of the tape.
Republicans have lost the popular vote in 7 out of the last 8 presidential elections. That has to change. The Washington establishment has failed us over and over and over again. It's time for a new generation of leadership.
Joining me now on set is Politico congressional reporter Nicholas Wu, Democratic strategist and NBC News political analyst Juanita Tolliver, and Republican strategist Matt Gorman. Thanks to all of you for being here. Nicholas, let's dive right in. Nikki Haley says she wants to win the popular vote, and yet she's also delving into the culture wars. Where does she fit into this Republican Party? What's her lane? Does she have the moderate lane?
Well, it's going to be interesting to see what lane she carves out for herself. Since we saw in that video, right, she's trying to encourage the party to move on from Trump in some ways, yet at the same time she has to thread the needle and explain how she served in his administration and had to defend many of the policies that she might be now urging the party to move away from. And so I think the question now for Republicans is how exactly they differentiate themselves from Trump and whether the floodgates will open with all the other people who've been waiting in the eaves to run for president.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Matt, let me read you what Sarah Longwell wrote in The Bulwark. Get your reaction on the other side. She writes, Haley's fundamental weakness is that she doesn't seem to know who or what she wants to be. Is she the MAGA devotee who loyally served in the Trump administration, or the sober and serious foreign policy heavyweight, or the reform-minded former governor of South Carolina who signed the bill to take down the Confederate flag from the State House grounds? By the way, Matt, she doesn't reference that in her video, that she took the flag down. Does she have to clarify all of that right off the bat?
No, I don't. Look, this is going to be a long campaign, and due respect to Sarah, I don't think she fits the mold of a Republican primary voter, candidly. But look, I think we tend to forget, because, look, she hasn't been around in office for a couple of years. She's a very talented politician, and I think we're going to see that more as she goes on the stump. I mean, when I worked for Jeb Bush in 2016, I mean, if you remember, the last couple of days before South Carolina, she endorsed Marco. We were hoping for her endorsement, and there was a lot of expletives thrown around the campaign headquarters when she endorsed somebody else. So, look, I think what she will look at is optimism, and I think in many ways she will sell herself on her optimistic tone.
Does she need to clarify where she stands on Trump sooner rather than later? Because she flip-flopped. Remember, she said, I'm not going to get into the race if he runs. Now she's getting into the race. Juanita, what do you expect to see from her? I mean, Matt's saying, look, she has some time before she draws all of these lines.
I disagree, because Trump is going to define her for himself, and he's going to do that for Republican voters, and he's going to say, this is someone who fell in line behind me after she was a never-Trumper, which he's already put out a statement to that extent.
Go ahead, Matt.
Well, it's worth noting, though, he did make a statement today, and he was actually quite complimentary of her.
Because she's a non-threat.
But again, you just said that he would hit her, essentially, politically, and he didn't.
When I say
so
that...
again, like, I think what it comes down to is he, is going to be nice, and I think the time for fighting will happen among some of these folks. There's no reason to start right now when, we're in February, right?
I said that in the sense of, I fully expect Trump to go back to his white supremacist, white nationalist language and target someone like Nikki Haley, who is Indian American, who started her ad by saying I felt different. I think Trump is absolutely going to get in that lane once they get to the debate stage.
One of the things that's notable is that she does delve into the culture wars, and we haven't seen Democrats in some of these statewide races really come up with a good defense. And you think about the gubernatorial race in Virginia, for example, Nicholas, where the issue of what was being taught in school became a flashpoint for Governor Youngkin.
I mean, Democrats I've talked to were very concerned after that election about the effect these sorts of culture war attacks would have. And at least in Virginia, it seemed like that was effective. But at the same time, there's somewhat of a conflicting message of the 2022 midterms where, yes, Republicans used many of these kinds of culture war attacks. And this time, Democrats responded. And so I think that helped stanch some of the losses for Democrats, at least in the House.
Yeah, and it's notable to hear her say, Matt, that she wants to win the popular vote, because this has been a thorn and was a thorn in former President Trump's side, both in 2016 when he won the White House and obviously when he was defeated in 2020.
No, it's true. I think it's a worthy goal. And I think a lot of this stuff, the only way you can do it, the only way you can add more voters to the 10 is to talk about it and try, right? And look, I think whether it's Glenn Youngkin, obviously Virginia is not a ruby red state, but also you look at Ron DeSantis with a record win by 20 points or so in Florida. The idea that the culture wars and the popular vote are mutually exclusive, I don't think is true.
And we're having this conversation as we are reporting on yet another horrific mass shooting, this time in Michigan. Juanita, is there any sense, and I had an interview with Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, she didn't seem optimistic that anything could get done in this Congress at all. In fact, she said, I leave it to the next generation. It was kind of an astounding acknowledgement by a sitting congresswoman.
Right. If anything, I'm always going to encourage Congress members to do their job and step up to the plate. But I understand what Representative Dingell is getting at. You have extremists running the House Republican Conference who is in control right now, who absolutely will do nothing. But the glimmer of hope here is the Michigan state legislature, because Michigan Democrats now have a trifecta. They can go after universal background checks. They can go after red flag laws and more, which they haven't been able to do for years.
Yeah, Matt, what do you think comes of this latest shooting? Is there more talk? Or do you think that another small piece of legislation could get done like what we saw in the wake of Uvalde?
Yeah, look, I think politically it was a very heavy lift to get Chris Murphy and John Cornyn together last summer. I think, what you saw when it came to the midterms, it politically inoculated some of the suburban moderates running for re-election. But look, I think that will be probably what we likely see for a while, just for the fact that politically it was a very heavy lift.
Yeah, Nicholas, one of the things that's interesting is that President Biden, and we saw this in his State of the Union address, again called for an assault weapons ban. And that's something that just doesn't seem to be a realistic ask, given the votes that do not exist for that in Congress right now. Do you think there's a more effective way for him to go about trying to get something done? Or at this point, with 2 years out before the election, do you think that all hope is lost in that regard?
I think in some ways it's an acknowledgement of the political reality of the situation, right? You have this tiny Republican majority in the House, the 51-49 Senate. And I think for someone like President Biden, he has to show Democratic voters that he'll try, right? That he'll aim for this maximal negotiating position. And then, even if they end up having to settle for something less, that can be seen as somewhat of a win. And I think as Congress has shown, after the Uvalde shooting, yes, that was a modest, relatively modest package of legislation, but it still showed that Congress can move really fast when they want to.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the people, when you think about the assault weapons ban, when you think about gun legislation that was passed so many years ago, is Dianne Feinstein, who announced today that she is not seeking re-election. This is what some California Democrats were waiting for, expecting. What do you make of it?
My only word when I heard the news was finally. Like, we all knew it was coming. Finally, Feinstein said it. I do think it's going to open the floodgates for a very wild primary in California, which we got to remember, the top 2 vote getters advanced to a general election. So I'm sure some Republicans are thinking, how can we eke into this?
Now hold my breath. Yeah. No, look, it's going to be fascinating. I think one of the things we've seen with Kamala and a couple other folks that come from California in the national stage is, all you need is a lot of money to run the, carpet bomb the state with ads. You don't necessarily need to be a good campaigner or a good communicator, but then when you get in the national stage, it can kind of expose you a little bit. So I'm watching that very carefully.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Nicholas, who are you watching? What do you make of this announcement today?
Well, I think now all eyes are on Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who's a longtime liberal leader in California. She's told her colleagues privately that she's going to run for the seat, and she's been waiting probably to try to, out of respect for Feinstein. But now, Feinstein has officially announced. Lee has made it clear that she wants to make this announcement during Black History Month. We've got a few weeks left of that, and so I think it'll be interesting to see how exactly that announcement comes and might shake up the race.
And what about Katie Porter, Adam Schiff? How competitive is this going to get?
Heavy hitters. I think Katie Porter's team released early polling that showed they had the top name recognition in the state thus far, but there's absolutely time and room for other candidates to maneuver, like Barbara Lee.
And of course, Katie Porter got into this very early, trying to clear the field. All right, you guys, great conversation, a lot to watch. Really appreciate it. Nicholas, Juanita, and Matt, thank you all. And as we go to break, we want to note that Club Q, the site of a deadly mass shooting that left 5 people dead and 17 injured in November, has announced plans to reopen its doors to the Colorado Springs community this fall. And also today, we are marking 5 years since 17 lives were lost in a school shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. Yes, it has been 5 years. Since that day, there have been 2,739 mass shootings in the United States. That's according to the Gun Violence Archive. In today's Meet the Press Minute, here's Senator Pat Toomey just after the Parkland shooting discussing gun violence and the gun reform bill he and Joe Manchin collaborated on. Take a look.
There's no part of the law that would have mandated that information make it into the background check system. How would your bill deal with that?
It wouldn't. The fact is, the bill that Joe Manchin and I introduced and that we still support, Chuck, it's not going to solve all problems, and we never suggest that it would. And one of the challenges that we face is what to do about someone who's clearly mentally deranged, but they haven't acted out yet in a way that allows you to adjudicate them as dangerously mentally ill, or they haven't committed a crime. Clearly, in this case, there were all kinds of warning signs that were They were advertised, right? They were communicated, and nothing was done. That's a problem. I think there's an important discussion to be had about a temporary restraining order on somebody who's evidencing some serious dangerous behavior. There'd have to be due process so that couldn't be used as a weapon against someone inappropriately. But look, our legislation, I think, would be very constructive. I still support it, but I'm not going to suggest it would solve all problems.
Welcome back. Officials say search and rescue efforts have come to a close in Syria, but across the border in Turkey, rescuers were still pulling survivors out of the rubble earlier today. A full 8 days after the initial earthquake, this cell phone footage shows the moment when an 18-year-old boy was pulled out of the wreckage this morning after he spent nearly 200 hours trapped inside. Unbelievable. And another video shows a 17-year-old boy receiving emergency medical attention after workers pulled him from the remains of a building. A local news organization reported his older brother was also rescued. The ongoing rescues in Turkey, juxtaposed with the lack of rescues in Syria, makes clear how different the situations are as aid workers in Syria are operating in the midst of an ongoing civil war there. Joining me now, President and CEO of the International Rescue Committee, David Miliband. David, thank you so much for joining me to talk about the ongoing relief efforts in the region that was impacted by those earthquakes in Turkey and Syria.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I mean, the earthquake has claimed tens of thousands of lives, but I'm afraid there's now danger to literally hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. I mean, we are 8 days removed from the earthquakes. We know that the recovery efforts are ongoing. We know that so many hospitals and medical centers in the region have been impacted. So what are the most pressing issues right now, David?
Well, I spoke to my team this morning. We have 430 people working in the northwest of Syria. We have 17 health centers that are open, and we're working to support Turkish partners in the southwest of Turkey. The greatest needs are in northwest Syria. 4.5 million people live there. About 2.5 million of them have been driven into that part of the country by the fighting elsewhere in Syria. And the needs now are for survival. Survival will be a success over the next few days and weeks. There's a desperate need for medicines. There's a desperate need to treat the wounded from the earthquake. There's real concern about water and sanitation systems to prevent a return of cholera. Basic household items are in short supply as well. And obviously food is absolutely critical alongside the water that's necessary to keep people alive.
Well, and just keeping the focus on Syria, it is obviously a country that has been ravaged by a civil war for years now. How is that complicating your efforts to help the people there? And do you need to get more aid workers into the region? Can you?
Well, ravaged is the right word. The fighting has abated in that there is now a clearly rebel-held area that's separate from the government-held area in the northwest of the country. The people who are in that northwest area of Syria are essentially caged in, and they're dependent on border crossings from Turkey in the north into Syria. The Assad regime in Damascus agreed with the United Nations yesterday to open more crossing points, which is desperately important because, frankly, there's a chokehold at the moment in the one crossing that's been open over the last year, because after a Russian veto in the UN Security Council 2 years ago, the number of crossings was reduced from 2 to 1. So it's not so much aid workers that we need to get in, it's critical health and household support that we need to get in.
Let's talk about Turkey now. Civilians there expressing their anger at the Turkish government, saying that the government bears some responsibility for a response that was slow and lacking. What are your colleagues there on the ground telling you about that, and what do you think needs to happen in Turkey?
Well, our focus is on the needs, not on the politics. What we very, very sadly have to come to the conclusion is that there aren't going to be further people saved from under the rubble. So it's a survival and recovery job in southwestern Turkey. There's a very strong government. There are strong municipalities as well. And so I think that what people on the ground are saying is really 2 or 3 things. First of all, they need to get as much, salvage as much as they can from the houses that they've lost and honor those that they've lost. Secondly, they need to get some normality, especially for their kids. Education is incredibly important so that the kids who are suffering from terrible trauma are able to establish some kind of normality. And then the third is the rebuild job. So it's a slightly different situation in Turkey than it is in northwest Syria. In Turkey, I think that the basics are taken care of by the state, by the government, but people are trying to rebuild their lives.
I just want to put a fine point on this, David. I know that so many of these efforts are recovery operations now, but are people still being found alive some 8 days later?
No, is the short answer to that. You can understand that 8 days in, the chances of finding anyone are really really non-existent. And that's why there's such sadness, and also some of the anger that you speak to is about delays, because delays cost lives.
And just finally, the greatest risk to survivors right now?
Ill health. The great danger in any post-earthquake situation is a terrible disease that runs right through communities, and that's why the water and sanitation systems are absolutely fundamental to this.
Well, David Miliband, we thank you and your colleagues so much for the incredible work and bravery to help the people who are suffering, who are working to rebuild in the wake of these horrific earthquakes. David Miliband, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Still to come, Congress versus artificial intelligence, how the technology is catching the attention of lawmakers amid concerns of an AI arms race. That new NBC reporting next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. The surging popularity of ChatGPT has cast a spotlight on how major corporations like Microsoft, Google, and Alibaba are now pouring hundreds of millions, in some cases billions of dollars, into developing artificial intelligence. It sparked concerns of an AI arms race. As this new technology grows more powerful, Congress is facing a daunting question. How does it regulate AI? NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Sirkin has more.
What artificial intelligence is evil robots with red laser eyes a la the Terminator.
Maybe not, but recent and dramatic advancements in artificial intelligence mean it can now perform complicated tasks, once only possible with human intelligence. And with the explosion of next-generation chatbots like ChatGPT, the debate is on. Unlimited potential or potential danger.
The explosion of the availability of all knowledge to everybody on the planet is going to be a very good thing and a very dangerous thing.
Last month, a 34-year-old congressman quite literally let a chatbot make his case for more action on AI.
This is a critical step forward in an era where AI and its implications are taking center stage in public discourse.
Regulating emerging technology is an ongoing challenge for Congress. From Facebook to Twitter and TikTok, and now AI.
We are lagging behind.
And who, or rather what, better to ask than ChatGPT to tell us why?
The way that you ask that question, I think, is very interesting, because you pose the question to ChatGPT, explain why Congress is behind in regulating AI. So you told the algorithm to assume that Congress was behind and to come up with some possible reasons. But it doesn't have the general intelligence to push back and say, wait, is Congress behind you?
The recent AI boom.
A race starts today in terms of what you can expect, and we're going to move. We're going to move fast.
Increasing urgency on Capitol Hill to come up with a plan before it's too late.
There's going to be enormous disruption from job losses. There will be jobs that will be eliminated, and then new ones will be created. And we need to think about how can we make sure that people can transition to this brave new world in the easiest way possible.
But there are very few lawmakers with experience in the industry. Ted Lieu, one of just 3 with a computer science degree.
Do you understand what AI does?
I have an elementary understanding as a senator. I've got a lot to learn about what's going on.
Very frankly, it's new terrain and uncharted territory.
Jay Obernolte has a master's in artificial intelligence. And 72-year-old Don Beyer, recently going back to school for a degree in machine learning.
We can start by explaining to our colleagues the way that AI works.
Right now, there are several proposals for dealing with AI in Congress, including a dedicated commission to provide recommendations. But no consensus.
What role does Congress have in regulating the industry?
So I think we have to. How we do that, I think, is going to be a matter of debate, and we need to just start thinking about it.
One potential approach, let AI regulate AI.
So overall, is this a positive for the world? Is the country able to handle this technology?
No one can argue that AI isn't a huge positive development for humanity.
As you could tell from my interviews with lawmakers, they really have to get on the same page into how to regulate this industry, because on one hand, they don't want anything that damages society, but on the other, is it a national security risk in and of itself to do nothing and not innovate in this space, especially when it comes to the only other global superpower, China, where Congress is clearly focusing, particularly in light of all of these aerial objects we've seen in our airspace over the last week or so. And so I think you're going to see more of a prioritization from Congress on both sides of the aisle, not just in innovating in emerging technology, but also in innovating in our competitiveness across the world.
Just a fascinating report, Julie Sirkin. Thank you so much for that. Fascinating also to hear those lawmakers acknowledge AI is new terrain for even them. It's a debate that Julie and the rest of our Capitol Hill team will continue to follow, as well as the rest of us. Thank you for being with us this hour. Chuck is back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now coverage continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.